Welcome to the debate. Imagine an engineering marvel, like a massive, multi-million-dollar bridge that connects two vital parts of a city.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. But instead of building a simple, sloping ramp to allow everyone to access this bridge, the engineers spend billions of dollars trying to build robotic legs for the citizens.
Wait, just so they can climb a steep set of stairs?
Exactly. Jagged, dangerous stairs. I mean, it sounds entirely absurd, right? You would look at those engineers and just ask, why not just fix the stairs?
Yeah, it defies all logic.
It does. And yet, when we look at the intersection of technology and disability, this robotic leg logic is precisely what governs our world. So today, we are dissecting this complex dynamic.
Right, and we're heavily grounding this discussion in the curriculum of a new, really comprehensive course on disability, technology, and techno-ableism.
Yes, and that course is heavily influenced by scholar Ashley Shu's work. The whole point of the course and our debate today is to challenge these deeply held myths around disability and tech.
Because the central tension is essentially this. To achieve true inclusion, should our primary focus be on designing technology to radically alter our built environment, dismantling systemic barriers?
Or conversely, should we focus on democratizing the power dynamics of technological design so that disabled users have the actual agency to choose their own functional interventions?
Right, and I'll be arguing that while techno-ableism is a profound threat, we can't just pivot away from bodily interventions entirely. If we do, we risk ignoring the nuanced desires of disabled individuals.
And I am taking the position that we must fundamentally reorient our approach toward the social model, basically adapting the world to the user, rather than forcing the user to assimilate to some artificial standard of normal.
Well, the true solution lies in disabled epistemological authority, which is a fancy way of saying who gets to decide what is built.
Right. Let me outline exactly where I'm coming from, though. Because for decades, the prevailing framework in engineering and medicine has been the medical model.
Which treats disability as a defect, essentially.
Exactly. It frames it as a physiological deficit, a tragic flaw localized entirely within a person's body or mind, which supposedly must be fixed by heroic engineering.
Yeah, the classic tech fix narrative.
It is. And this approach demands that disabled people absorb all the cost, the pain, the friction of fitting into a world that refuses to accommodate them. But one of the core learning objectives of this course we're looking at is realizing that technology must assist and not overtake its disabled users.
Right. Disability isn't a problem to be solved in a laboratory.
Exactly. True innovation requires forcing the environment to adjust. Think of a simple ramp or a screen reader.
They require the world to yield to the user.
Precisely. We waste billions forcing disabled bodies to mimic non-disabled norms, which is the textbook definition of techno-ableism. We should be dismantling exclusionary infrastructure instead.
Well, I look at this from a slightly different angle. The tech fix narrative, especially driven by a non-disabled gaze, is totally flawed.
Highly flawed.
But the media's obsession with the person who, quote-unquote, overcomes their disability through high-tech gadgetry, the problem isn't the existence of the intervention itself.
Then what is it?
It's a catastrophic lack of participatory design. When the movement says nothing about us without us, it means disabled people are the unquestionable experts on their own lives.
Okay, but how does that change the technology being built?
It changes who holds the pen. If a disabled user genuinely desires a technological intervention to reduce chronic pain or to navigate differently, that's a valid choice.
Right. I'm not denying individual choice.
But the structural failure is that non-disabled engineers and corporate boards hold all the authority over what counts as an improvement. We shouldn't reject functional tech. We need to hand the keys to the laboratory over to disabled creators.
Okay, let's look at how these functional interventions actually play out in the real world, though, because there is a massive gulf between the high-tech promise and the everyday reality.
You mean the techno-solutionism stuff?
Yeah, this idea that complex social problems are solved with a flashy gadget. Let's use an example straight from the course: multi-million-dollar robotic exoskeletons.
Usually funded by the military, right?
Usually, yes. Supposedly to help paralyzed individuals stand and walk. The videos go viral, there's triumphant music, people applaud scientific progress, but what happens when the camera stops rolling?
The user is left with a highly restrictive piece of hardware.
Exactly. These suits can weigh up to 25 kilograms. They are entirely battery dependent. And here is the most piercing reality check. How does a person go to the bathroom in an exoskeleton?
Well, they can't.
They literally cannot. You cannot independently use the toilet while wearing one. You have to take this heavy machinery off, transfer it to a wheelchair, and then put it all back on.
It's incredibly inefficient.
And meanwhile, a disabled person might ask their insurance for a $1,000 pair of specialized shock-absorbing forearm crutches, crutches that actually save their shoulder joints over decades of use.
And insurance denies it.
Routinely denied. The system pays a fortune to make a paralyzed person stand up so they look normal, but won't pay for unglamorous technology that improves daily life.
See, I think you're drawing the wrong conclusion from that example. The absurdity of the exoskeleton failing the bathroom test isn't a failure of bodily intervention as a concept.
No.
No, it's a failure of who is in the design room. I mean, no disabled wheelchair user was directing that multi-million-dollar project.
That is definitely true.
Right? A wheelchair user would have brought up the bathroom problem in the very first design meeting. But let's shift focus to culture, because Techno-Ableism produces cultural erasure too. Take sign language gloves.
Oh, the ones that translate hand movements into text?
Right. Every few years, well-meaning hearing engineering students invent a glove that translates sign language into synthesized speech. And every single time, the deaf community overwhelmingly rejects it.
Because it forces the deaf person to wear a clunky device.
Exactly. Solely to make non-disabled hearing people comfortable. It places the entire burden of communication on the disabled person. The hearing person doesn't have to learn sign language. The deaf person just has to strap on a robot hand.
Which honestly just proves my point. The technology forces the individual to assimilate to the environment, rather than the environment accommodating the individual.
But look at cochlear implants. They're constantly framed by the medical establishment as a miraculous cure for deafness.
Right, totally ignoring deaf culture.
Exactly. It ignores that deaf communities view themselves as a vibrant linguistic identity, not a biological deficit. Technology is being used as a weapon to enforce conformity to a non-disabled standard.
But see, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because you're still treating this as a matter of individual consumer choice, or, cultural preference.
How so?
At its core, this is a structural barrier. You mentioned the sign language glove placing the burden on the individual. If we only focus on who gets to design the glove, we let society entirely off the hook for failing to communicate.
Well, to quote the late Stella Young, no amount of smiling at a flight of stairs has ever made it turn into a ramp, right? I would argue that the manual wheelchair is actually the perfect piece of technology.
Because of how it interacts with space.
Yes. It demands curb cuts. It demands elevators. It forces the built environment to structurally acknowledge human variation. When we obsess over whether someone can choose a brain-computer interface, we ignore that the ramp outside the local hospital is still broken.
Okay, but you cannot separate individual agency from systemic change. And if physical hardware forces bodies into a normal mold, we have to recognize the exact same ableist logic is being hard-coded into our digital world.
You're talking about algorithmic ableism.
I am. We're rolling into an era where AI governs who gets a job or a loan, and these systems are trained on datasets that systematically erase disability.
Yeah, one of the course modules actually does a deep dive on this. Digital systems operate on a normal user template.
Right.
Let's break down how this works with AI hiring tools. Say a company uses an algorithm to evaluate a video interview. The software is trained to look for sustained eye contact or a specific tone of voice to measure competence.
Because the data set was built entirely on neurotypical behavior.
Exactly. So what happens? The algorithm seamlessly and quote-unquote objectively penalizes an autistic candidate who avoids direct eye contact, or someone with dysarthria, where muscle weakness makes speech sound slow.
The AI registers it as poor communication skills.
Yes, bias literally becomes infrastructure. The technology isn't glitching, it's working exactly as designed. And that design is exclusionary.
See, I don't buy that the answer is to view digital tools purely as structural threats. Algorithms aren't inherently exclusionary.
They aren't?
No, they're exclusionary because disability is erased from data sets by the people holding power. If we apply the principles of design justice, meaning impacted communities lead development, AI actually holds profound assistive potential.
Okay, give me an example.
Microsoft's Seeing AI app.
The smartphone tool for blind users.
Yes. It was co-developed with blind users. It uses the camera to narrate the visual world, read documents, identify products in real time. It doesn't try to fix the blind person's eyes.
It just translates the environment.
Right. It uses AI to translate the visual environment into audio. It is a brilliant example of collective access. The answer to algorithmic ableism is ensuring disabled communities are in the boardroom, leading data collection.
But who bears the cost of the errors when these automated systems inevitably fail?
What do you mean?
When an automated welfare system makes a consequential decision to cut off someone's health care, and it operates in a black box where it can't even explain its reasoning, who pays the price?
Well, obviously the most marginalized.
Invariably. You praise apps like Seeing AI, but let's look at how accessibility functions inside massive tech corporations. It depends entirely on the commitment of one or two passionate individuals.
It's treated as an act of corporate goodwill.
Exactly, a passion project, and the moment that employee leaves, the accessibility work stops. This is why we have legal frameworks, like the RPWD Act here in India, or the UNCRPD.
Which the course equips students to critically analyze, actually.
Right. They aren't just bureaucratic acronyms, they mandate access. If accessibility isn't baked into structural accountability, the technology is doomed to fail the user.
Legal frameworks are vital, sure, but even a perfectly compliant app is totally useless if we ignore the messy reality of what happens after it leaves the lab.
The maintenance aspect.
Yes, maintenance, repair, intersecting realities. It's never enough to design the perfect tool in Silicon Valley. What happens when that tool enters a developing economy?
This is a glaring blind spot in the techno-ableist narrative. Let's use the course as case study. Imagine a disabled person living in a rural district, like interior Odisha or Vidarbha.
Right.
They're given a highly sophisticated motorized assistive device through an NGO scheme. The media gets their photo op.
Politicians shake hands, take pictures.
Exactly. But 3 months later, the motor burns out. There is no specialized repair center within 200 kilometers. The replacement parts are imported and impossibly expensive.
So the technology has functionally failed.
Utterly failed. The media loves the dramatic moment a prosthetic is fitted. There are tears, soaring music, but they cut the camera before the reality sets in.
The months of painful adjustment.
Yeah, the blisters, the mechanical failures, the lack of maintenance infrastructure. If the infrastructure for repair doesn't exist, the tech was never designed with that user in mind.
And that abandonment rate is staggering. Up to 80% of assistive technology is abandoned.
80%?
Yes! And it's abandoned precisely because of this disconnect between elite designers and the intersectional reality of the user. Disability justice must evaluate technology alongside class, geography, and poverty.
A high-tech wheelchair is useless if you can't navigate unpaved village roads.
Completely. Or if a woman faces compounded discrimination based on caste or gender that prevents her from accessing public spaces to begin with.
The social barriers negate the technological solution entirely.
So if we want to challenge the myths around tech, we have to acknowledge that a locally repairable, well-maintained ramp outside a primary health center is far more revolutionary than a brain-computer interface.
Absolutely.
But realizing that requires granting the person in Vidarbha the authority to say, don't send me a microchip. Send me a mechanic. Send me concrete.
I think if there is one thing we must firmly establish as we conclude today, it's that we have to aggressively strip away this techno-ableist fantasy.
The idea that disability is just a medical misfortune.
Exactly. A biological error that must be fixed by heroic engineers. It's a dangerous myth that places the burden of adaptation entirely on marginalized bodies.
Right.
True technological progress demands structural change, designing our software, AI algorithms, roads, and policies to accommodate human variation by default. Technology should assist us in dismantling environmental barriers, not force bodies to assimilate.
While the exclusionary environment is undoubtedly a massive barrier, I still maintain that the ultimate key is centering the agency of disabled people. We can't lose sight of the individual.
Fair point.
Technology shouldn't aim to eliminate disability, but it must be available to support diverse ways of living, and the power to choose how that tech interacts with one's body must belong to the users.
Nothing about us without us.
And this is exactly why the course we've been discussing is so vital. It's highly discursive. Even the exams are designed not as memorization tests, but as spaces for students to continue this exact conversation.
Yeah, it asks the hard questions about our alternatives for emerging tech.
So we leave you with this thought. Think back to that multi-million-dollar bridge and those engineers desperately building robotic legs to climb the jagged stairs.
It really puts it in perspective.
As we look toward the future, we have to ask, are we going to keep trying to engineer the perfect human to fit a broken world? Or are we finally ready to just build the ramp?
Thank you for joining us on The Debate.